Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to today's second bonus upload. And let me tell you something, it is full of just absolutely terrifying experiences. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support this channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click the bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's second bonus, shall we? Today's first encounter. I had a friend. His name was Artie. His real name, though, was Arto, which he told me meant bear man in Finnish. I thought it was rather remarkable that his entire family was of Finnish heritage. All of his family had migrated to the United States in the late 1800s, and they all lived in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan in Alger County. During boot camp, Artie and I hit it off very well. Whenever we would get a moment to sit and talk, we did. Over time, I learned that he and I had quite a lot in common. The two of us shared a great love for the outdoors. We both fished, and we both liked to shoot. However, he was a hunter, and I had never hunted, per se, preferring to spend my time shooting sporting clays. During this time in the service, we agreed to visit each other on our home turf after the military gig was finished. In the summer of 1985, I packed my truck and headed to Artie's house in Michigan. I'd made it a point to pack my 12-gauge semi-automatic Beretta, which Artie had advised we would be needing for protection. When I asked him for what we would need protection from, he said bears were the primary problem. I thought fair enough, though I wondered what else may also be living out there. I spent 2 days cruising up to his neck of the woods, and when I started getting close, everything was all woods. To me, this place was like a primeval forest. I mean, there were only gravel and dirt roads surrounded by thick, predominant pine forests. And I could only occasionally catch sight of a house or a building. After having turned around numerous times, I finally found his hacienda. It was quite the spread, consisting of one large home, a smaller one, both surrounded by a number of barns and outbuildings. I pulled into his driveway and hit the horn. Suddenly, it was as if I was in the middle of a family reunion. People, both young and old, were springing out of everywhere. They were greeting me as if I was the prodigal son returning home, and I thought to myself, this is going to be a great time. After the initial meet and greet, I was given the nickel tour of the homestead. One of the barns was like a machine or blacksmith shop, and these dudes had everything. Apparently, great-grandpa made a lot of metal tools and goods, both for himself and the surrounding residents back in the day. Another barn was loaded with professional lumberyard and milling equipment. As it turns out, his family had harvested much of the lumber that their home and homes of many of their other families in the area were made out of. These folks were made from real stock. They knew what to do and how to do it, and they were very proud of it. As the day continued into night, Artie shared the itinerary for the next 9 days. His plan was for us to take a tour around and see the surrounding sites, followed by some camping, hiking, and fishing in the truest wilderness style. It all sounded great to me after dinner had been prepared and eaten, which, by the way, was served up in a true Thanksgiving fashion. His father had taken me into the den to peruse the family gun collection. They had 3 gun cabinets lining that room. Each cabinet had been handcrafted as the collection grew, and all of their wood had aged differently, one looking more beautiful than the next. They had 47 rifles and shotguns, and the drawers beneath the cabinets were stocked with handguns. To tell you the truth, I had not seen many guns before this, but these were so fine that they could be in a museum collection. To top it all off, the family knew everything about each gun, and I do mean everything. We spent hours just in front of the gun cabinets talking. I was receiving an education in each firearms history, who made them, and what country they had come from. It was at this time that Artie pulled out a large handgun, saying, "Allow me to introduce you to Harry." It was a .44 caliber he had bought after seeing Clint Eastwood's detective exploits in Dirty Harry. That sucker was a hand cannon, not a handgun, and Artie said that in the morning we would shoot it. This gun was obviously Artie's baby. After the next morning's breakfast, we went outside with Harry in hand. We must have shot through 100 rounds. My hands and shoulders hurt. My ears were ringing. What a bitch that thing was. We then walked over to one of the buildings which we had not been to yesterday. As Artie swung the doors open, there she was. A huge beast of a monster truck. It was metal flaked blue and glistening like a star. It had a cap of the same color, and on both sides was sprayed the name Littlefoot. In retrospect, the choice of name seemed almost foreboding. It was his version of the original monster truck Bigfoot, made with a '69 Ford F-250 and powered by what he said was a blown 428. He installed all kinds of blocks and shackles under the body and added everything and anything you could imagine to make that truck reach the sky. The exhaust system consisted of headers going into cherry bomb mufflers, and when he fired it up inside the barn, the timbers shook. The cab was accessible by billet aluminum steps and handrails. This truck was like an adult carnival ride. It was unbelievable, and for the duration of my stay, Littlefoot was our primary mode of transportation. Artie took me everywhere, and I learned everything there was to know about this region. It had been a tremendous logging area, and up until just after World War II, copper mining had also been a huge industry. He told me that the local mines had produced more mineral wealth than the California gold rush. He also said that the forests were packed with black bear, wolves, moose, deer, gray and red fox, bobcat, porcupine, heron, rabbit, and everything else you could imagine. No wonder why he told me to bring my shotgun. We took a boat ride to see the miners' castle and pictured rocks, which were gigantic in a beautiful glacial formation. Most of what we were seeing and doing was in an area called Munising. He brought me deep into the areas of the woods there. I don't remember if all of the forest was called Hiawatha or just a section of it, but that really doesn't matter. All of the woods were the same, vast and dense, without a soul to be seen. There were waterfalls, both small and large, located here and there. Artie said that something like 2 to 3% of the state's total populace lived in this area, even though it represented a third of the state's total landmass. People were sparse commodity here. After 2 days of running around and having a blast, we returned to the homestead and prepared for our camping and hiking and fishing adventure. Out in the barn, Artie took a small stepladder and placed it in the rear of the truck. He opened the tailgate and the cap He had already hooked us up with everything we needed in the bed. There was a fire extinguisher, a shovel, a chainsaw, a first aid kit, and a variety of rope. He said that one of the ropes was to hoist our perishable foods into a tree so that the area's bears wouldn't get wind of it. He also had 2 large water jugs and the kind that you see at a Little League game. A large cooler that we were going to fill with only ice. The rest of our supplies were canned items and some dry goods, as well as a case of Gatorade and more than a few brews. On our interior sides of the bed, Artie had built some racks made of wood. On one side, there was a rack for long guns. On the other side of the bed, there was a rack for fishing rods. He had already put a pair of fly rods and several spinning rigs. He even had an electric winch in the front and rear of the truck. Hanging around here was like being in the fire department. Having prepared ourselves with everything humanly imaginable, we took off. Artie said that we were heading to an area near Utrain Lake and River. On the way, it was fairly long, consisting of a decent dirt road, which led into some real four-wheeling paths. We had to break out the chainsaw in the truck on 2 occasions to clear some downed timber from the trails, and it was clear to me that no vehicle had been in here for quite some time. The trees we had cleared must have been laying there for years. The whole traveling ordeal took us 2 hours before we finally reached a small, somewhat clear area where we would set up camp. Now, when I say clear, it was more or less an opening in standing pines with debris scattered everywhere. Artie said that many areas had been replanted after the logging industry had ravaged a fair amount of the forest, which led to a hodgepodge of young and old pines occupying the same space. We set up camp, dug a fire pit, which really didn't take too much time at all. Once we were done, my friend said that there's plenty of time left in the day for us to head down to the river and catch some trout. So we grabbed the fly rods. Artie took Harry. I grabbed my shotgun before we started walking and walking and walking. Just so you understand, at this stage of my life, a long walk for me was going in and out of the mall with a 2-mile bike ride sprinkled in from time to time. My legs were shot, but Artie told me that we were getting close to our destination. He knew this because the forest started to tighten up. There were a lot of smaller trees and brush as we got closer to the water source, and there was no longer anything resembling a trail. We were looking for breaks in the growth and fighting our way through the bramble when we suddenly broke free of it all and spotted the river. Now, we are not talking about Colorado here. You could easily walk across this river. In fact, as I looked up and down as far as I could see many of the tree branches flanking the river's edge, where not more than 8 to 10 feet from touching the branch to the other side. Additionally, this river was strewn with wood and rock. It was relatively calm flowing water, and as I began to focus on the surface, I could see that there was plenty of trout to be had. We began fishing, the 2 of us using terrestrials, which are flies that are tied to look like a variety of insects. Because they are tightly spaced trees, you really couldn't cast much from anywhere in here. We had to more or less flip and mend the flies into position. We must have been fishing quietly for several hours, enjoying the company of ourselves and the fish. It was really beautiful. I was more relaxed here and now than I had been for quite some time. I had almost zoned out of existence when I started to hear a loud rock clacking noise. To me, it sounded as though it was very close. I turned my head to look at Artie, and we made eye contact. He shrugged. We kept fishing, and the sound kept happening. It sounded like 2 rocks crashing together against something being smashed. There was a distinct crunch. It reminded me more of breaking of a mussel shell than a clam shell. Since a mussel shell is much softer and thinner, it makes more of a crunching sound when broken. As the sound continued, the two of us began to slowly walk toward each other. I was trying to look in the sound's direction, but because of the tightness of the river with the overhanging branch and the river's curvy nature, it was impossible to see very far. The source of the noise could have been 40 feet away, and we would have still been unable to see it. When we got close to each other, we whispered so quietly that we might have well been lip-syncing. Artie thought that it may have been a moose antler clacking together, and that the noise may well have been much further away than it sounded. Somewhat reassured, I slowly moved back to the pool I had been fishing in. But this time, I made a point to position myself a little closer to the bank and my 12-gauge. After a while, the noise stopped, but now I could hear something moving about in the brush, and it started to freak me out. I could see Artie craning his neck as well, fighting to see movement in the trees. We came together again, deciding to wait it out a little bit, and then we'd split, hoping that whatever was moving around would head out. As we began fighting through the brush on the way out, I was really on edge. I expected something to get the jump on us at any moment, and between holding the gear and shoveling trees around, there wouldn't be much time to mount and shoot if need be. I started to think of my old friend. I had met my old friend, or Fat Day, as I called him, in a parking lot by a lake. I used to go there to study in my car, and I would see Day and some other guys who were always there. They fished with light tackle and worms, catching bluegill and sunnies. While getting out of the car to stretch my legs and talk to them, I found that he was from Florida, and I could see a big scar circumventing almost his entire shoulder. I happened to be studying for a medical test, so I asked him what type of surgery he had. He told me that while in Vietnam, he was on sentry duty walking back and forth on the camp's perimeter. He and another GI would walk in a half circle, meet again in the middle, going back and forth over and over again. As he was walking, he heard a twig snap, and quickly as he turned, someone had already buried a bayonet into his shoulder. As he tried to move, the Viet Cong kept forcing the blade around in him. He had been falling to the ground when, instinctively, he mustered up his M16 with his one good arm and emptied the entire magazine into this creep, killing him. Anyway, I felt the same way right now. All the way back to camp, I couldn't shake that feeling out of my spine, and the forest was deathly quiet. You could barely hear us walking, let alone anything else. Finally, we reached camp, and I began to make a fire while Artie stepped behind some trees to take care of business. A few minutes later, I heard startled shouting. "What the hell is that?" I walked over to see. He stood looking at a large snake on the ground, which had been tied in knots on both ends of its body. It looked like a snake dumbbell, but it was still alive. There was absolutely no way these knots were tied by a snake writhing around on its own. They were as tight as a rope knot. Taking into account the shortening of the knots, the snake must have been 6 feet long. We couldn't help but wonder who or what might have been in our camp while we were gone. The entire thing was mind-boggling. Artie took the snake and flung it into the woods, saying that it would make a good meal for something. Now, maybe it's because I'm somewhat of a city boy, but I couldn't see how Artie could be so stone cold and unmoving about this. After spending a night around the campfire BSing about everything and anything under the sun, we stoked the fire one last time and crawled into the tent. I had my semi-automatic laying next to my side, and Artie had Harry next to his head. Artie was snoring, but I couldn't sleep a wink. I was too busy thinking about what happened during the day. Sometime during the night, I started to hear some grunting and grumbling sounds outside of the tent. It was hard to tell if they were near or far until a large shadow was cast between the tent and the fire. After a few minutes, the shadow had completely darkened our tent's interior, followed by a large, deep growl, which, with this noise, the top of the tent started to move downward. Artie stopped snoring. With my eyes fixed on the shadow, I grabbed my shotgun, and before I could even think about shooting, Artie sat up and squeezed 3 consecutive rounds right through the tent. The flash and concussion was unbelievable. The smell of cordite and smoke filled the confines of the tent. Whatever this was let out a scream I can only describe as being that of a T-Rex. It was so loud that it shook me. The side of the tent was burning and the shadow had vanished. Whatever it was sounded like it was running away, screaming and bellowing as it did so. I unzipped the tent and burst out with my shotgun. There's no way I was going to die without a fight. Artie leapt out behind me, and the two of us stood there, heads moving left to right, looking and listening. This beast was still screaming off in the distance. I was sure that Artie had nailed this sucker with 3.44 caliber bullets at point-blank range. If it was a black bear, it would have dropped where it stood, but it didn't. It ran away. I asked Artie what the hell could limp alone run away with 3.44 slugs in them. His answer was that bears can be tough monsters to take down now. I had been thinking of doing exactly what he did. I was going to shoot too, but at that moment I had thought about it being some loser dude in the woods playing in really bad. Was possibly a deadly prank. Flashlights in hand, we started looking around for blood, but we found nothing, and the ground was so hard that we couldn't see any prints, not even those of our own boots. Beyond the glow of the fire, our surroundings were as black could be. It was extremely unnerving, to say the least. We got the fire going hot and heavy and stayed up for the rest of the night. At this point, I was ready to call it quits, but I didn't want Artie to think I didn't have balls. I was the city slicker after all. We were supposed to have nuts of steel, right? According to our game plan, we had 3 days left, so in the morning, Artie, seemingly have brushed everything off that happened during the night, suggested that we head over to the lake today. So we grabbed our spinning rods and our guns and headed off to the closest side of the lake. This time his direction took us through a marginally more open tract of wood. Until we got nearer to the lake, then the undergrowth thickened up like it had been by the river. At any time, we positioned ourselves along the lake's edge and started to throw some poppers and spinners, getting into a fairly decent amount of action quickly. The sun was out on the lake, and it was nice to be out from the canopy of the pines. While we were fishing, I had noticed something large and dark in color peering in and out of the brush along the far side of the lake, first in one place and then the other. Every time it appeared, I pointed in its direction, asking Artie if he saw it. Despite all my prompting, he saw nothing, but I definitely saw something that was alive and moving. And I couldn't get my mind off the campsite incident last night. We must have been fishing for 6 hours or so, taking a few food and drink breaks in between, when Artie said we should head back and maybe do a little varmint hunting before sunset. That sounded good to me, so we began our long walk. By the time we had gotten back to the vicinity of camp, we had been gone for maybe 8 to 9 hours. As camp came into view ahead of us, I couldn't believe what I was looking at. The entire campsite, including the truck, had been ransacked. There was things thrown up into the trees. Our cooler was completely flattened. It looked as though a steamroller had run it over. Cosmetically speaking, the truck was in ruins. The cap looked like a tree had fallen on it, and both of the side windows were blown out. The cab had been smashed down so severely that we couldn't open the driver's side door. And there was no evidence of a log or anything anywhere that could have done that damage. The tailgate was partially torn from its hinges and bent under the rear bumper. The front winch was torn completely away from the truck. 9/16 bolts and washers ripped cleanly out of steel, and the other winch had all of the cable pulled out of it and was completely detached from the housing. Both of the aluminum steps were torn off, and we were only able to find one of them. Even then, it was in a mangled state. Thank God the cab had not been opened. The front of the hood from the grill inward looked as though it was hit with 3 or 4 blows from a 12-inch wide tree trunk. I say this because I have no other way of describing what we were looking at. And having said as much, there was not a single indicator as bark, chips, or even any marks on the vehicle, which would have shown that part of the tree had actually been used to wreak the destruction. There was no small dents in the truck, just large, long, and wide blows to the metalwork. What bothered me most of all was the type of power that would be needed to flatten a large igloo cooler, and the fact that the large bolts had been torn away from the truck, leaving a reverse dimple where they had been in the steel. This was insane. Whatever did this was not an individual or a group of individuals. No man could have done this. We said nothing to each other. There was nothing to say. We simply stood there aghast. I jumped up into the bed of the truck and tried to push up on the broken cabin effort to open things back up a bit. I was forcing my back against the broken roof of the cap. And as I worked my way into position, I noticed something very odd. Caught in the very end of one of the cracks in the fiberglass were several very long, dark-colored hair. It looked as though something with hair had lost a few while their bodies slid or dragged off the roof. I showed them to my friend, and he said to me that it couldn't have been a black bear. These strands were like 8 to 10 inches in length, which was way too long. We gathered all the stuff we could and shoveled it under the remnants of the cap into the bed of the truck. We grabbed the tailgate and flexed it back and forth until we could twist it up into the bed. When we came into camp, everything in the truck had been neatly organized. And when we were about to leave, it looked like an open trash can. Artie climbed into the cab from the passenger side, which was not an easy task without the step, and started brushing the shattered glass off the seat and everywhere else. The truck started right up, and he let it run. I guess about an hour had gone by since we came back to camp, and it was time to get the hell out of here. It was a long ride in, and it was going to be a long ride out. As we left, I couldn't help but feel bad for Artie in a number of ways after all. I came on his invitation, and now his truck was in ruins, and we were leaving with our tails between our legs. What would his family think? What would anyone think? We finally got clear of the woods. We started heading down the road. At some point, we saw a cop coming the other way. Artie waved him down as he stopped. I couldn't see him because of the truck's height and the fact that he was on Artie's side. I heard him ask what had happened to us. Artie shut the truck down as I jumped out, and he followed. We spent about 45 minutes walking around the truck telling the officer our tale. He wrote up an incident report and gave us a copy saying there's shit out in those woods that we know nothing about. Later on, as we entered Artie's property, everyone came out to see the truck and talk to us about that ordeal. It was at dinner that evening that his father began to tell us about what his father said to him. He told us that loggers and miners had spun many yarns about giant, hairy, humanoid creatures that they would see while in the timber. He said his father told him that they would mess with and damage their equipment after the workers had left for the day. They would come back in the morning and find machinery bent and broken. He said that this was a regular happening for workers, and that men would speak of things being thrown into the camp without them seeing who or what had done it. There was times that men went missing and were found torn apart. At any rate, that's my experience. Artie and I still speak to this day, and he actually rebuilt that truck. Artie's dad took the hairs that we retrieved and framed them in the den for family posterity. I haven't been back to Artie's property since. Wow. Wow. Unbelievable. I like what that police officer said. There are things in that woods that we can't even imagine. I just think about this summer at where Tom Mezek disappeared up in Horicon and all the things that happened to me in that short span of summer, spring, summer, fall, 5 months, 6 months. But it seemed like an eternity because how it happened. But whatever smashed through those trees when I was running down that mountain wash, I don't know. All I could see was this blackish brown blur going up into the woods. And like I said many times about that location, if whatever that was that ran up that way, and I've shown you guys when I walk out onto Lily Pond Trail, there's the trees that all the trees are straight, and there's a section that just, whoa, I never thought about this. So that section of trees, right? That where I'd be standing in relation to where I was standing, and we heard those metal like pings that day, that would be straight that way. And how that, whatever that was that ran up into those woods, would be straight into where I found those rocks. And then as I was walking out onto that trail, and I caught whatever it was run down that hill, or not hill, mountain, hit the trail. Now the trail, as you guys, many of you know who have seen the videos, the trail is only large enough to literally fit maybe 1.5 people. You know, I'm not even going to say 2 because it's very narrow. And where it ran down, it would all meet at that one spot where those 3 rocks were stacked. And I blazed my own trail that one day. And I found that stacked rocks 2 years ago. Not this year. I found them 2 years ago. But then after I found them, that's when everything started to get real weird there. And of course, I had to bring the shofar and, of course, blow it 3 times and then 3 times each. So 3 stages, 3 times. It was like the double trinity. Maybe I should have done it 3 times so it would have been a triple trinity. I don't know. Anyway, wow. Just an intense experience. All right, let's get into today's second encounter. All right, so when I stopped and I thought about that 3 rock mound that I found, and I thought about the metallic noises, I almost wonder if that area where those rocks, those stacked rocks are, if that would be the center point of a portal. I don't know. And I've really never really shared too much about the area, the Three Rocks, because I know how people are, and I know how, oh yeah, you found 3 rocks stacked up in the woods like you didn't do it, a little bit of doubt. And I agree. I would have doubt, if I saw some guy that I didn't know say, look what I just found. And that's why I haven't talked about it too much. Only few people that I've told on the channel, periodically I'll talk about it. But my dad, me and my big Jim had a long talk about it. And of course my mom was there and my kids. So, but anyway, I got a couple other encounters to share with you. I didn't know that encounter would be so long. But I did say I got an Upper Peninsula, a couple of police officer experiences, and a very strange one at that to end it with. So here we go. I was a 24-year veteran on the force when this experience happened. I was on highway patrol at night. Most of the old-timers preferred night shift because it was typically quieter than the day. And on this particular night, the weather was crisp and clear. Now, there are a couple stop signs that I would generally set up on earlier in the shift and later at night. I would hit the main highway with a radar gun. I had a spot that I would back into, which was on a grassy edge of the highway. The forest was at my back and a rock wall dominated my left side. By the time the speeder made it around the granite outcropping and saw my squad car, the gun would already bagged their speed. I had already tagged a couple of speeders that night and was preparing for the next. I turned the car off momentarily and stepped into the trees to take care of some business. It was pitch black, a moonless night. Trust me when I tell you there is no one around this stretch of highway, just woods and rocky walls. I was finishing up and turning toward the car when I could see headlamps shining around the bend, coming toward my position. Now remember, nobody could see me here until they were virtually passing in front of me. Just as I had seen the glare of the oncoming lights, the car's horn started sounding and they were leaning on it heavy. They flew by and kept going, and I had taken maybe 3 steps toward the car when a large dark mass came into view from around the wall on my left. Whatever it was came walking along the shoulder of the highway, and it was huge. I immediately knew this is what the car was honking at. As I was reaching for my flashlight out of my belt loop, I said, "Hey you, stop right there," and hit it with the light. When I did so, it turned toward me and growled. Its eyes were glowing red before the flashlight even hit him. When the flashlight's beam met its face, it let out the loudest, most intense roar you could possibly imagine. Its head held high in the air, and it howled. Mouth was wide, and I could see these long canines. I grabbed for my revolver and prepared to shoot, but I didn't have time to shoot before it fled. It took maybe 4 fast steps or leaps for it to clear all 4 lanes of the highway, and both shoulders disappearing into the night. I jumped into the car and started it up, flipping on the headlights, and I saw nothing. So I turned on my spotlight and moved across to the far side of the shoulder. When I did, I caught it briefly looking in my direction with its red eyes beaming in the darkness. The damn things were like red reflectors on a kid's bike. It turned and hightailed it out of sight into the woods. In total, there were 4 units on patrol that night, with dispatch and sergeant being back at the station. When I got on the radio, I started telling everyone what I had just seen, which I didn't think would be taken as a joke. That's exactly what happened. The chatter over the speaker was ridiculous, and the dispatch told me to fill out a report. The creature had been 7 to 8 feet tall, and when the light hit it, all I could see was these glowing red eyes, its sharp canine teeth, and this long hair everywhere. Its teeth were large, like huge dog teeth. The hair was quite long. The head and shoulders were just enormous. It was the most frightening thing you could ever imagine. I don't know why I didn't pull the trigger, but when you fire around as a cop, it's a big deal. And firing around at a werewolf, well, you can just imagine how well that would have gone over. As the thing turned across the street, I saw that it must have been 5 feet across at its shoulders, and its fur on its ass and tail was totally encrusted with leaves and shit. While it was near me, the stench was emanating from it. It was sickening. The next day, I went back to that spot in my truck. I parked on the shoulder and walked back to where it had been and where it had come from. I clearly could see heavy impressions in the soft grass, and when I crossed over to the side from where it ran out of view, I could see even deeper impressions. These prints were large, 3-toed. You can't believe the crap that I had to put up with after that night. And I retired shortly thereafter, doing 25 years of service. That's interesting. I've always heard of Dogman and Bigfoot having matted fur, but never with you never hear about people describing, hey, it did have leaves and stuff encrusted in its matted fur and stuff. And him to say, there was leaves and possibly crap on its hind end there. Found that kind of interesting because you don't hear too many experiences when people, they always talk about, the fur was matted, but it would make sense that in those mats there would be dirt, there would be leaves, sticks, debris, fecal matter, whatever. Interesting. Tonight's third experience, but second, law enforcement. Dispatch had sent out a call asking all available units to report to the scene of a domestic dispute. A woman was calling for help, saying that her husband was going to kill her with a sword. Now, any type of law enforcement officer will tell you that these are the worst type of calls to go on. Nationwide, many officers have been shot trying to defuse such situations. As soon as the call came over the radio, I was on my way with 2 other units. As I arrived at the location, which was a mobile trailer located deep in a wooded lot, the car ahead of me, we got out of our cars and went to the door with our guns drawn. You could hear that there was a heated dispute still going on inside of the trailer, including a lot of cursing and yelling coming from a man and woman. My partner pounded on the door yelling police while I watched, standing off to one end of the trailer. Just after the knock, the female voice shouted, "Good, they're here. Now you're going to jail, you low-life creep." Seconds after this, I heard a crash from the backside of the home, which followed by the sighting of a man running out into a field while wearing nothing but a pair of shorts and sneakers, having forced his way out, jumping through a window. I shouted to my partner that we had a runner and started in pursuit of the man, just as the 3rd unit was arriving. Upon seeing me give chase to the man, the 3rd officer started driving out into the field with his Bronco in pursuit. It had been around 4 p.m. in the afternoon when pursuit began. As I heard over the radio that the man was unarmed, I had stumbled and fell, and at that same time the Bronco had reached a deep furrow that the truck couldn't cross. Now that officer and myself were both on foot, chasing after this guy. The runner had already reached the woods, and additional backup was on its way as the 2 of us joined forces, entering into the woods together. We spaced ourselves out about 40 yards apart. Now, A running man going into a desolate forest only wearing a pair of shorts is not going to last long. I must have been several hundred yards into the forest when I came across a creek, and I radioed to my partner about the find. There was a slight embankment comprised of moist brown soil that appeared drier as you moved away from the water. After I told my partner about the creek, he moved forward, coming across it himself. This officer was now going to move easterly, looking for tracks the man might have left while crossing the creek, and I was going to follow behind. Both of us believed that he had been gone more in my partner's direction. As I was closing the gap between where I started and where my partner had begun, I came across some gigantic impressions on the creek's edge. The impressions were so fresh that they were still filling with water from the wet soil. One of them looked to be 2, maybe 3 feet deep. The prints had to have been close to 2 feet long and very wide. I radioed to my partner immediately, telling him to backtrack to my position. We stood there looking at the tracks, and you could see one more print on the other side of the creek as well, indicating that something had crossed the creek here. Now, just so you can visualize this, the creek is about a foot deep at its deepest point and maybe 12 feet wide in total, including several feet of bank on each side, and there was no way that these tracks were those of a man we were just chasing. We both walked through the water into the woods, following the tracks. Maybe 40 feet into the woods on the other side, we found a sneaker, and at this point, there was no reason for the two of us to go any further alone. We retreated back to the field and to the trailer. Reinforcements were already there. I presented the sneaker to the wife, who confirmed that was her husband's. With the assistance of another agency, our office began a manhunt. We staked out various roads and areas where the man would eventually have to emerge, knowing that he couldn't last long in the woods with no clothing and only one sneaker. After several days, the man had not been seen or taken into custody, and the wife said that she had not seen him near on the property, and neither she nor any relatives had heard from him. During this time, those giant impressions by the creek had been the hot topic of much discussion, as well as the sneaker we had found. Some felt that the prints had been enlarged by the softness of the creek's edge, even after I had insisted they were not, since I had seen them within moments of when they had been made. After the passage of about 2 years, this time turned into a missing person case. The man has still not been seen at all. About 3 years later, some hunters came across a human skeleton remains 5 miles north from where that hunt began. They had been hunting in some thicker timber and found the bones in a patch of tangled briar. After the report, the remains were retrieved by our forensic team. After much examination, we believe that the bones belonged to our missing man. DNA was retrieved from the remaining spouse's child, and it turned up as a match. The skeleton was that of the runaway man some 3 years earlier. But here's the real clincher, and why I want to tell you this. According to the coroner, the man's skull had been caved in past the mid-sagittal line. In other words, the head had been smashed in more than halfway by blunt force trauma. Now, just to give you an idea of that type of force, if I was to take a full swing at someone's head with a baseball bat, I couldn't even come close to that type of impact. Not even with 2, maybe 3 full force blows could I recreate that damage. Also, numerous ribs had been broken via compound fracture. They were all clean fractures, where the bones had been broken into 2 separate pieces. All of this must have occurred while the man was alive in the forest, running and alone. Wow. Man, that is one of my biggest fears and many of yours. as a hiker and where I live in the Adirondacks, obviously they were talking about a Bigfoot. I believe that they were talking about a Bigfoot, not a Dogman. Whitehall, New York. Many of you who are familiar with the Bigfoot community knows Whitehall, New York is a hot spot for Bigfoot. There's been numerous accounts. I always have a fear of running into a Bigfoot. And, right there just shows that these things are not Harry and the Hendersons, some cuddly mascot. These are monsters. These are truly flesh and blood monsters. Danny Van Drimeny said it perfectly. Humanity has been fighting these monsters for time immemorial. Yet people want to think that, they're our little buddies because they make dolls like this and dolls like that. Well, they aren't our buddies. These are monsters. On to tonight's final encounter. I visited Spokane, Washington on a sales trip in the summer of 2004. I was then and still am now employed by a major electronics distributing firm that had a number of clients and prospects in that region. This was a 4-day trip, which, depending on the client, typically involves a little whining and dining, as well as other activities. A fair amount of my clients are younger and game for just about anything. I've hiked, skied, and fished with more than a few of them, but this particular day, I had no takers, so I was braving the Quartz Mountain Lookout Trail alone. I was told that there was some fantastic views from the surrounding area once you reach the fire lookout station. Now, as I begin, I must tell you that this isn't called Quartz Mountain for nothing. In fact, the mountain is predominantly made up of quartz. In the world of paranormal, quartz and limestone are said to be engines for the weird and strange occurrences. I mention this now because what I'm about to unveil to you is very strange indeed. I began my day's hike up to the fire tower. There were actually a number of trails that you can take up the mountain, all of which vary on level of difficulty. Relatively speaking, the first 3/4 of the hike was uneventful. It was on the last quarter where the trail started to tighten up and become closely flanked by hanging branches and trees. Once I had made it to the top, I climbed up into the fire tower to have a lookout and a bite to eat. And from that point of view, 4 lakes were visible, sprawling across the surrounding area. I knew all their names: Spirit, Hauser, Newman, and Liberty. I was checking out the lay of the land with my binoculars when my eyes locked onto something white moving around on the grassy field just below me. It was too far to tell for certain, but it appeared to be a small girl wearing a white dress with no shoes on. She was frolicking in the field just like any other small child would do. I watched her spin and run around the field for almost 20 minutes. I kept saying to myself that at any moment someone would surely come into the field and get her. I mean, she couldn't be out there alone, unless, of course, she had somehow gotten lost. Finally, my fatherly instincts kicked in, and I decided that I had to go down and try to locate her. What if she was lost? She could die. She could really die out here, and nobody would know. I couldn't walk away from here without knowing she was okay. I estimated the distance between us and figured out which trail was the most direct before I departed from the fire station heading in her direction. Once I entered the trails, I could no longer keep an eye on her. It was a blind hike downhill, and I could only hope that I was heading in the right direction. A strong sense of urgency welled up within me about this little girl, and I was going down the slope at a frantic pace, hoping the forest would break open, revealing the field as quickly as possible. After 30 minutes, the forest gave way and I entered the field. Immediately, I started to look in every direction, searching for this little child. But I didn't see her anywhere. I thought that maybe I had found the wrong field. I was about to continue onward when I heard what sounded like a little girl singing, but it was faint. Frantically, I started to look around in every direction when suddenly, standing far out in the field, was the little girl. I couldn't understand it. I had just looked in that same direction and saw nothing. There was nothing in the field to hide behind. Yet, there she was, dancing around as though she had been standing there the whole time. She couldn't have run out there in a matter of seconds. For a moment, I could only stand where I was and question my own sanity. After a long moment, I yelled, "Little girl, are you lost?" She didn't respond. She just kept skipping, dancing, and singing. I shouted again, taking care to raise my voice. "Hey there, little girl, are you all right?" Suddenly, she stopped dancing and just stood with her back to me. My hair was actually standing up. My hair is actually standing on end as I'm telling you this, because what happened next was out of this world. The little girl wearing a white flowing dress and no shoes was maybe 100 yards from me, and she suddenly started to transform in front of my very eyes. The dress seemed to melt away from her, and she grew and began to turn dark. I wanted to run, but I was frozen where I stood. There, right where the little girl had been a mere seconds before, was now a monster. I grabbed the side of my head and fell to the ground. I thought that I must have had a stroke, and I was going to die out here, delusional and alone. All I could do was lie there in the grass, holding my head and trying to sort out the pieces of what was happening. After a time, I rolled onto my side and sat up. Once again, my eyes fell upon the monster as it walked away. It crossed the length of the field before disappearing. Even when it was gone, I remained where I was. Even now, I am unsure how long I sat there, not being able to come to grips with what I had just seen. At some point, I managed to get my feet back under me and made my way to my car. That afternoon, I walked into the doctor's office. I wasn't sure of what I was going to say, but I had to make sure that I was okay. I was eventually called in, and the doctor asked me how he could help me. I spun a yarn quickly with a great deal of personal shame. He told me that the mind can do funny things, and he asked me if I had been working long hours and traveling a lot. He must have thought I was off my rocker and popping pills, and frankly, I couldn't blame him. Who would believe this? The doctor wrote me a script for something to help me sleep, telling me to follow up with my regular doctor when I got home. To this day, I cannot shake the events of that afternoon. It haunts me like a reoccurring nightmare. So, unfortunately, he didn't see the creature's transformation, its face. He saw its back as he fell to the ground. After doing a little looking into what it might have been, obviously it's a shapeshifter of some sort, but it could be like the Native American trickster, which makes a lot of sense because it tricked him to come down even though it didn't hurt him. It tricked him to come down as a little girl, but then maybe to cause fear, it then transformed into its true form. I remember in the live stream, someone asked if shapeshifters have a true form, and I do believe they do. I do 100% believe they do. And to me, depending on what the creature would be, I think the most humanist, or the most natural form for a shapeshifter would be human. Or their kind of demonic form, whatnot. I guess we'll end this upload with this interesting little thing I heard the other day. So, we all know about the Great Flood and Noah and the Book of Enoch and this and that, and Nephilim. We talk about Nephilim a lot on the channel. But I heard this interesting theory, right? That when the flood came, these fallen angels that bred with human women created these entities, right? In all of history, we've had part animal, part human creatures, even in Greek, Roman, Native American, Egyptian, all cultures. So there's truth to it. You know, how can one culture, let's say China, have the same similar to a Native American tribe in the middle of the country? So there is truth to these things. But right, check this out. So when the floods occurred and these creatures were killed off, what did their spirit transform into? Some sort of demonic whatever. That is, if they had a soul. And there you have it, folks. I do hope you all enjoyed this second bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you, and I'd like to thank you for supporting the channel. It is your support that helps this channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. These events, they've happened. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.